For more than 600 years, the Ottoman Empire was, without a doubt, a global superpower. I mean, its armies were knocking on the gates of Vienna and pushing deep into the mountains of Iran. But how? How did this tiny tribe on the frontier grow into an empire that spanned the globe? Now, most people will immediately point to the Janissaries, right? But the real story, the secret engine that powered it all, well, that's something else entirely. So let's dig in and uncover the true genius behind the Ottoman war machine.
You see, the Ottoman Empire's greatest strength, the absolute core of its military and administrative power for centuries, it wasn't those elite, super disciplined Janissaries that everybody's heard about. Look, they were a critical piece of the puzzle, for sure, but they weren't the foundation. The real power, the sheer numbers, came from a much larger and, honestly, often overlooked part of the military.
So what was their secret then? How did they manage to pay for and field this massive, loyal, constantly growing army that could conquer and, just as importantly, hold on to huge territories? Well, the answer is in this incredibly elegant and powerful system that literally turned conquest itself into fuel for, well, more conquest.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We have to go all the way back to the 13th century. The early Ottomans, led by guys like Ertugrul Gazi, were basically a warrior tribe living on the edge of the Byzantine Empire. They were known as Uch Bey, which means marcher lords. Their whole existence was this constant state of low-level warfare on the frontier.
So in this pretty chaotic world, Osman Gazi declares independence in 1299, and his first big successes, like the major win at Bathius, all depended on these decentralized raiders. They were called Gazis or Akenjis. But you gotta understand, these weren't troops in a formal army. They were more like independent war bands, all looking for glory and loot. Now, this Gazi raider system was actually fantastic for fighting out in the open. They were fast, they were self-sufficient, but, and this is a big but, it came with two huge weaknesses that almost stopped the new state in its tracks. First, they were terrible at taking fortified cities. Big places like Bursa and Nika held out for years because these raiders just didn't have the discipline or the gear for sieges. And second, their loyalty was, let's say, conditional. They fought for loot, not necessarily for this new idea of an Ottoman state.
So here's the bottom line. For the House of Osman to go from being just another tribal group to a real empire, they had to solve this problem. They needed a disciplined, loyal, professional army. The very raider system that gave them their start was now the thing holding them back.
The first crack at a solution came from Osman's son, Orhan Gazi. He totally saw the problem and tried to create a new, centralized army. But, as we're about to see, this first attempt didn't quite stick the landing.
So around 1325, they create the Yaya infantry and the Müsellem cavalry. The idea was pretty straightforward. You give villagers a tax break, and in return, they serve in the army. But here was the problem. These guys were still farmers when there wasn't a war. They never became full-time professional soldiers. They didn't have the high-level skills, and eventually they just got pushed into support roles like building roads and things. It was a good idea, a step in the right direction, but it just wasn't the final answer.
And this right here brings us to the real game changer. Instead of trying to invent an army out of thin air, the Ottomans adapted a system from their predecessors, the Seljuks, that was just pure genius. It was called the Timar system, and it would become the literal engine of the empire.
Okay, so what in the world was it? It's actually pretty simple. When the Ottomans conquered new land, the Sultan didn't just give the land away to some noble. Instead, he granted a soldier the right to collect the taxes from that piece of land. That grant was called a Timar. And in exchange for that income, the soldier had to show up ready for war with his own horse and weapons.
And check this out. This is the beautiful, self-sustaining cycle it created. Step 1, the Sultan conquers land. Step 2, that land gets surveyed and divided into these Timars. Step 3, the Timars are given to soldiers, called Sipahis. And Step 4, those Sipahis make up the army that's needed to go out and conquer more land. It's a perfect loop where expansion directly funds more expansion. Incredible.
But the real brilliance was in the fine print, the rules of the game. First, and this is key, the Sultan always owned the land itself. The soldier, the Sipahi, only got the tax revenue. This was huge because it stopped a new class of powerful landed nobles from popping up. And second, the grant was totally conditional. If you didn't show up for a campaign, or if you didn't fight well, poof, your Timar could be taken away. That's a pretty powerful way to ensure loyalty and performance.
Now, to really get how smart this was, let's put it side by side with European feudalism, something we're all more familiar with. And the difference is just night and day. In Europe, a lord owned the land. The title was usually hereditary, and a knight's loyalty was to his local lord, not always to the king.
The Ottoman system? It was completely centralized. The land, the grant, the soldiers' loyalty, everything flowed directly back to the Sultan and the state. It was an administrative masterpiece.
So, what's the end result of this incredible system? Well, it created this powerful, self-reinforcing loop, a conquest snowball, that just got bigger and bigger as it rolled across Anatolia and smashed into Europe.
The idea at its core is so simple but so devastatingly effective. As the empire got bigger, its army got bigger right along with it, which of course allowed for even more growth. And the best part? It cost the central treasury almost nothing. The army literally paid for itself with the land it conquered. It was a self-funding war machine.
And, this system also had this other brilliant side effect. The promise of getting a Timar was so tempting that it pulled talented warriors away from rival Turkish states in the region. So, with every single Timar they granted, the Ottomans weren't just making their own army stronger, they were actively making their competitors weaker. That's a double win.
By the late 1400s, these Timarli Sipahi were the absolute heart and soul of the Ottoman provincial army. Take the Battle of Agajairi in 1488. In that battle, they formed these massive, powerful wings of the Ottoman army, showing everyone just how vital they'd become to the empire's power.
So the Timar system was this revolutionary solution that locked down the empire's huge frontiers. It solved all the big problems: loyalty, funding, and raising an army, all in one elegant package.
And really, that's the #1 thing to take away from all this. The Timar system was the administrative and military backbone that allowed the Ottoman Empire to not just conquer, but to actually control its massive territories for centuries. It truly was the engine of the empire. But there's always a but, isn't there? This system, as brilliant as it was, created a brand new problem. The Sipahis were great for securing the borders, but their loyalty was tied to their lands, scattered all across the provinces. So, who was back in the capital protecting the Sultan himself?
And that, my friends, is where the famous Janissaries finally enter the story. While the Timarli Sipahi were out there controlling the provinces, the Sultan needed an elite household guard whose loyalty was personal and absolute, owed to him and only him.